1. So this happened several years ago when I used to work for a national used car dealer. I worked in their inventory department at the time. One of our responsibilities was customer preps. A prep was when a customer was buying a car and in the process of signing paperwork. We would grab the car from the sales lot, gas it up and clean it up, then park it in the drive aisle, where the customer would come out and see their car ready to go after they finished signing the paperwork. Typically, this was a straightforward task. Whoever had a free hand can grab a prep. We all carried radios to communicate with each other, and the sales managers had radios as well to notify us when there was a prep or other customer service issues that we were responsible for helping out with. When the sales managers called back for a prep, we acknowledged them to let them know we heard them and someone would be on it. To set the scene for this instance of malicious compliance, I have to briefly describe the situation. Our department, along with the detailers and technicians, were having one of our quarterly meetings. Now, these meetings were totally void of any useful information. They consisted of a 15-minute video from some corporate bigwigs bragging about how great business is, then another 30 minutes or more of the managers in store and sometimes district managers crowing about how great we were doing and keep it up. They did provide free sub sandwiches for everyone, and this was all done on the clock. I personally found these meetings to be overly pretentious and obnoxious, so I always skipped out on them and continued working, most times on my own. I know, shocking, no one else wanted to give up free food on a paid break just to keep working. Eventually, one particular manager was not happy that I always skipped out on those meetings. He told me I had to attend and could not leave until it was over. I asked, "What about preps?" He said, "Don't worry about those, we'll deal with any of them after the meeting." Well, okay then. I've been told what I needed to do. I came into the break room at the start of the meeting, got my sandwich, popped my feet up, and turned off my radio. One of my co-workers sat beside and had his radio on, but had the volume turned down really low. During our meeting, sales apparently had a good streak of selling cars. Every few minutes, my co-worker told me there was a prep. As time passed, more preps were called back, and there was no one responding to the sales managers calling them back. My co-worker asked what I was going to do. I said, "Finish my sandwich and sit here, I have my orders." One of the sales managers was beginning to get pretty irate. We could tell by his tone over the radio. About 30 minutes into the meeting, the sales manager poked his head in the door and said there were several preps waiting and asked if someone was going to get them. The manager that made me come to the meeting picked a couple of other guys to leave the meeting early to get the preps. He knew I would have left long ago to take care of them, but this was his way of punishing me for working instead of taking a paid break and listening to a group of braggarts during the past meetings. By this time, there were 6 or 7 preps waiting and a drive aisle full of customers and salespeople waiting on their cars to be brought around. Some were waiting close to an hour before they had their cars brought around. Later that night, I was passing through the showroom, and the manager who was getting irate from earlier stopped me to ask me what was going on. We had a good working relationship, and I was kind of his go-to person when there was a serious customer service issue, so he valued my word. I told him everything that was said to me about not working during the meeting, and how they wouldn't worry about preps during the meeting. Of course, that didn't go over too well, and there was a big meeting the next day between sales managers and operations managers. Following that meeting, it was declared that during any future meetings, a specific person or persons from my department would be designated to listen for and grab any preps that were called back. I was never chosen for that role. I just had to sit back and eat my sandwich while still getting paid. They really taught me a lesson. 2. So, the last 8 or 9 months of my life have been a total mess because of my job. I started at a job at the end of summer in 2021, which was immensely difficult to get because of UK office job availability and COVID, so I was thrilled beyond belief to get something. This was fixed term for 12 months, but in the first few months I had gone above and beyond. I started with one set role, and because of how impressed my workplace was with my graphic design, I got placed doing poster designs, organizing activities, and events, etc. on my own. I absolutely adored it. My manager and I worked so well together, and my chronic pain disability improved as I was relatively stress-free on the job front. This soured quite soon. Because of willingness to take on responsibility, I ended up with a shed-load of jobs. And when, inevitably, I couldn't fulfill the expectation, I was berated. My manager's kindness quickly switched, and I ended up being her punching bag. I arranged a whole Christmas fete, brought in over £1,000 of donations for a food bank, and did so much running around to ensure everything went well that my big toenail turned black from so much physical labor, and that still wasn't good enough. The day after this fete, I tested positive for COVID, and I was actually grateful at this because it meant I could have a break. Things progressively got worse. I always thought things can't get worse, and they always did. After Christmas, my disability worsened massively, which meant I was in constant agony. I noticed because of my mistreatment the benefits or normal work treatment that others were given. I came in 10 minutes late, which was the latest I came in, to avoid worsening my pain by waiting for a less busy train. And I was frog-marched out of the office and told off about my punctuality, which was when I disclosed my medical condition. I eventually have a meeting with occupational health. After being told a meeting would be set up for me after my disability disclosure, I get my probation extended for not setting up this meeting myself. During the meeting, I brought a letter from my doctors explaining my debilitating pain, its impact, disclosure of other conditions. My main issue was the need to work from 10 to 6 so I could avoid traveling during rush hour, and given that my manager had told others in my team in the same position that they could start 10 and finish at 5, not even making up their contracted hours, I thought this something that could be done. Occupational health were confused that was all I was asking, and gave a lot more recommendations than the reason for the meeting of ways they could accommodate my disability. Anyway, despite my probation extension because of not organizing this meeting on time, my manager and her assistant forget about my meeting and did not respond to occupational health with their report and suggested plan of action. I brought it up thrice in this time and was told that they were too busy and they will schedule it themselves. Eventually, after I raise this with HR, they coincidentally remember and make no secret of, I can speak to them at any time no matter what if I need something. You don't have to go to HR. So, they set up a meeting to go through my disability recommendations and decide to do their first ever one-to-one with me. 5 short minutes on why they can't accommodate my 10 to 6 hour change, nor anything else, then 40 minutes on the fact that they will not be renewing my contract even if I wanted to. I could interview for one of the 16-year-old temp roles they offer, $10 per hour in a bright green t-shirt. My rent is astronomical at the moment, so going from an office role to that would just bankrupt me. It would not work at all. I was dismissed with shrugs and told I'm literally not needed anymore. My job will just not be needed, so I cannot stay. They don't have capacity. The next day, I go on sick leave, as at that point I'm at rock bottom. I feel truly defeated. And from the first day of my leave, I am made to feel like an absolute burden and nuisance. Not gonna go into detail, as I've rambled again. The last 2 months I've been off sick have been difficult. I couldn't find a job to save my life, as the UK job market is really hard at the moment. And despite my indiscernible relief and joy at not having to go back to that place, I've been really struggling with the thought of being unemployed. Unable to pay rent and then losing mine in my partner's home. I have also been unable to afford to actually go out much, and the lack of social contact has been hard, even though I'm a big introvert. I give it everything I've got to find myself a job, and lo and behold, this week I find exactly that. A totally work-from-home job, a huge pay rise, and even from my first interview, I got on incredibly well with the people I would work with. I could not have wished for a better outcome. Today, I got the first contact from someone at my current workplace who actually seemed like they give a fuck, Because they hadn't heard from me for months, HR called to check on me, as one of the CEOs had been in touch concerned about where I'd been. I've spoken to this CEO a few times after delivering poster campaigns for them, but not much at all. HR said that the CEO had wanted him to ask me how much I knew about my contract ending next week, as clearly there's no communication in hell, and whether I would consider extending my contract, as there's been no advertising, promo, events, posters, etc. in my absence. For the CEO of a very big company to individually request my return, that's a big deal. In short, I think they're struggling in my absence. I look at their website after my interaction, and what do I see? Today a new job listing. My role that was, in my manager's words, literally not required as there's zero capacity. The fact that I got a job last week and now do not have to go back there can only be fate. And now their desperation for said role, dictated by a CEO to me, honestly warms my soul. It is the pettiest of revenges, considering how they treated me and made me feel. And being able to say no to a job I had desperately needed only 2 months ago, and knowing they cannot advertise without me, is deeply satisfying. I found out from the HR guy today that they have the most unemployment they have ever had. 100 vacancies in a corporation of maybe around 900 staff. Absolutely heartwarming. 3. Let's go back 2 years. My wife and I were looking for a rental, and we got referred to a house that was for sale, but the owner was open to renting the house out. He gives us a quick tour and tells us 2 prices, a lower price and a higher price, which includes a stove and refrigerator. He eventually failed to provide us the appliances, but still kept the higher price. He also mentioned that he lived in a house behind us. Apparently, both houses shared a water line, and to save us trouble, he would pay for the water bill. Keep this in mind. The first year of renting went smoothly. After our contract ended, we decided to stay another year. This is where things started to go downhill. We started to see how manipulative he really was. He wouldn't get us a yearly contract, but would do a month-to-month agreement, promising he wouldn't kick us out. He kept our deposit and continued to charge us the higher price. Never fixed our leaky hot water pipe, but asked us to close it. He would threaten to sell the house, telling us not to be alarmed if we see a for sale sign outside. He did this for another year, so we would always be worried whether or not this would be our last month or not. So my wife and I hatched a wonderful idea. He's wanting to sell, why not buy it? We're already living in one of the houses. We ask him what he wants for both homes. He wants $150,000. What a steal! But there's a catch. He's afraid his home won't appraise for the sale price because he needs a new roof and wants us to pay for it. Red flag number 1. We tell him get it in writing and lower your asking price. He gets a lawyer to write him a contract and conveniently leaves out that he would reimburse us if the deal falls through. Plus, he can check out whenever he wants. Red flag number 2. Finally, one day while talking, he slips up and tells us he owes 2 years' worth of house taxes. So if he did sell to us, we would have ended up paying for those. Red flag number 3. Revenge. After months of going back and forth and the deal falling apart, we find a house and close within a month. We stopped keeping up the rental, turned on the leaky hot water pipe, and are leaving with a 1-day notice and will be turning in our keys instead of handing him money. He tried to screw us and now he's got to fix his walls, his pipes, and will not be making money since the house will stay empty. To explain, he didn't want to come down on his sale price and he didn't have the money to fix his roof, so he asked us if we could pay for it. We agreed, but only if he would come down on his sale price depending on what we spent. As a precaution, we wanted him to reimburse us in case he backed out. His contract said he could back out at his discretion. He didn't want to go through a real estate agent and only wanted us to fix the roof with a contractor of his choosing. We secretly had someone else inspect his roof, and we discovered 2 huge sinking holes through the ceiling. He also didn't want to let us conduct a home inspection. This was a learning opportunity for my wife and I. We learned about the entire buying process and what to look out for. We are getting our first home tomorrow. 4. I'm a gas station cook and cashier. There are only 5 workers in total. I work in a very small town. There is a customer who comes in multiple times a day to play lottery and usually some food. He prefers to come in my days and swears I always give him good luck because I tell every lottery player good luck as I hand over their tickets. Last week he came in and got his usual lottery tickets, an order of potatoes with a corn dog. To make a note, we all follow the same rules on cooking and use timers. We have a potato slicer and use the same breading every day of the week. He leaves and comes back about 2.5 hours later, complains for a refund on his potatoes because they were cold and soggy when he tried to eat them. I asked him when did he eat them because they were fresh out of the fryer when he bought them. He straight up tells me, "I waited for them to cool down." This idiot waited for 2 hours after he bought them. I tell him I cannot refund him and this was his own fault. He yells at me and says the prices are too high, how he hates my Hindu boss and will get me fired if it's the last thing he does. So I said multiple cuss words and tell him, well, you can always talk to my boss about me if you want. He proceeds to yell how he doesn't talk to dark-colored people, only whiteys. Ugh. On my day off, he went in and complained about me to my co-workers. 2 different people, both white. They both tell him he has to talk to our boss as they cannot do anything besides pass on the complaint. He says fine, he'll be back after the boss comes in. This morning, I finally talked to my boss and she praised me to high heaven that I finally gave him what he deserved because he always treats her bad and refuses to talk to her to tell what he wants. He will point to whatever until she guesses right. He told her I better be fired by the end of the weekend. I go in at 4 a.m., do the breakfast cooking and open at 5. He shows up a few minutes after 4. I leave the door locked and front lights off until I open. He pounded on the door for a few minutes. I walk to the door and tell him I open at 5. He will have to wait. He curses at me, so I just flip him off and walk back to the kitchen. He sat outside until I opened. Came in the store yelling at me that when he pulls up, no matter what time, I better unlock the door for him. I laughed in his face. He orders his sausage egg biscuit and usual lottery tickets. Then gets quiet and tells me all his tickets on my days off were losers and swears it's because my coworkers didn't tell him good luck. I take his money, give him his change back, and walk away to stock the cigarettes. He tells me, "You're forgetting something." I just look at him with a big smile on my face as I already know what he wants. I ask, "How may I help you again?" He says, "You forgot to tell me good luck. I need a winner." I just laugh and looked at him. He grumbled something and walks out, scratches his tickets and comes back in. He wants a refund on his losing tickets, claims he deserves it as his tickets were losers and it's my fault for not telling him good luck. I tell him with a big smile on my face, no refund on lotteries, sorry. He sat outside for a while and tells my regular customers how I treated him, and I should have been fired for it already. These people come in every day. They always get the same things, so I already have everything set up for them and waiting to get payment. Most come in laughing jokingly, saying you're a horrible person for selling him lottery tickets without saying good luck. He comes back in, and I sell him 6 $5 tickets. Next customer comes in, gets the same ticket, scratches the bottom line, and scans it. $500 winner. As I'm counting out the money, he comes back in mad that they were all losers again. He asks the customer, "Did she tell you good luck?" The man looks back and says, "Yes, she always tells me. Look, I just won 500 on the same ticket as the one you played." Oh boy, was he mad. He said he will talk to my boss again and demand I be fired again for making him lose his money. My boss was my relief this morning, and we laughed so hard about his losing. She told me if I didn't want to deal with him, she could ban him from the store, as he is always rude to her and now me. I told her, oh God, no. That's my entertainment. I will no longer be telling him good luck. She told me I'm so petty. I said only to ignorant people. So to all you lottery players, good luck. Except you, Jeremy. 5. Alright. So this is going to sound horrible, but hear me out. I'm not entirely sure what's wrong with me because my parents say, you don't need to go to the doctor, it's not that bad. But basically, standing up makes me pass out. So does being in the heat for too long, or going more than an hour or two without eating. It's even worse when I'm on my period. I'm female. Forgot to mention that. I also have immune system issues from being born prematurely. So with that out of the way, let's get to the story. This year's heatwave has been horrible, almost 100 degrees Fahrenheit every day. I'm fortunate enough to live in America where air conditioning is a common thing. However, I have to deal with my stepmom. It was well over 90 degrees outside. Due to being busy that day, I hadn't had a proper meal in quite a few hours. On top of that, I was on my period and I had a cold. So all of the worst things happening at once. Now when I get my period, I don't just get stomach cramps, I get horrible cramps in my entire body. Painkillers rarely help, heating pads rarely help, and I feel like shit for at least 2 days. I'm also much weaker and have less energy, so usually I try to rest for the first day or two. My parents decided it would be a good day to do some yard work. For me, that meant weed whacking, raking up all the leaves from the lawnmower, pulling weeds that couldn't be reached by the weed whacker, and some random tasks. My house is on a hill covered by rocks, so I have to basically mow the lawn in those places with the weed whacker. For anyone who hasn't used one, those things are heavy, especially when it's all uphill. Overall, these jobs would take me 3 to 5 hours to complete due to how small I am and the circumstances. I told them that I couldn't do it and they got mad, yelling at me that I'm being entitled and lazy. So I started working. My stepmom loves to micromanage everything I do. You missed that whole spot. You're working too slow. Stop wasting time and get to work, etc., etc., etc. I had to sit down a few times and drink water and, not pass out. This made her very mad. What do you think you're doing? I was getting dizzy, so I'm taking a break. You're so dramatic. I used to pull weeds by hand when I was your age. Stop being so lazy and get your chores done. Needless to say, I nearly collapsed a few times. Neither of my parents were budging despite this. I went inside to get some food, and it was the same thing. Let's go. You have work to do. Finally, I had enough. My stepmom came outside and said, "Can't you see? You missed all these spots. Quit having your job and get it done. I don't want to see a single blade of grass sticking up." I smiled politely at her. Not a single blade of grass? Got it. She nodded at me and went back inside to relax. Time for the PettyRevenge. I turned up the weed whacker and went ham on that grass. I started with a patio, digging a small moat-like hole around the edges so no more grass stuck up. I did the same thing to the fire pit, the house, the driveway, and the shed. Then I went to the hill and weed whacked as close to the dirt as I could without breaking the weed whacker. Step 2 of my revenge, I pulled all the weeds that I couldn't get with the weed whacker and threw them into the fire pit. For those who don't know, you can't light green plants on fire. I filled that bad boy up. I then did the same with the grass that I raked, dumping it all in the fire pit. It's a big fire pit, and the whole thing was filled with freshly cut grass and pulled weeds. "What did you do to the yard?" my stepmom asked me. I put on my most innocent face and said, "I was just doing what you told me to. You didn't want any more grass sticking up." She looked at my father, who shrugged. Side note, I was abused in that house. I ended up moving recently, and my life has greatly improved. Now you might be wondering how I had the energy to commit this petty revenge, and I'll tell you. Rage, pettiness, and a hella good weed whacker. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 161. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Right, we are on... It doesn't really matter. Time is a pure construct. It doesn't matter. It's completely arbitrary, so we are. That's all that matters. We are. And there are no special shout-outs today, so maybe it's not today. As I said, time doesn't matter. But no special shout-outs, although we will have a question of something. It could be the day, it could be the night. I mean, some of you will be listening to this in the daytime, and then some of you will be listening to it at the exact same quote-unquote time on the other side of the world, and it will be a completely different time of day. I swear I'm not high, I'm just feeling a bit weird today. Anyway, Hellfreezer's question of the day, and today's question is retro. Do you need to have lived in a time period in order to feel nostalgia for it? And that might sound a little odd. You might be thinking, of course, Hellfreezer, of course you do. Except, I know that for a fact there are kids living today who are totally rocking the 80s style, loving the 80s music and all that, movies and such. They were probably born in 2000. Maybe late 90s. So they're definitely not 80s kids. Like I was. I was born in 81, had my teen years in the 90s, so those are the decades that informed me as a person. So I lived through them, and I do get nostalgic for them sometimes, especially the music, and sometimes like certain like the... It seems like movies were better in the 80s, but again, that's probably just because these are the ones I was first exposed to, and I think, I've got very fond memories of them. But that being said, there's also times when, very often actually, I'll be enjoying music from like the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, right through to every year, every decade before I was born, especially like 60s and 70s music, right? Although I'm a bit of a fan of like some older songs. There's one I quite like called "Let Me Call You Sweetheart." It goes, "Let me call you sweetheart, I'm in love with you." And that's a much older song. That's before my parents were even born, so to give you an idea. And for me, they're very comforting. There's a certain fondness I have for all that stuff, just all forms of entertainment before the year of my birth. It's not technically nostalgia because I never lived it, but it feels very, very similar to real nostalgia. So, in your opinion, do you need, and by all means, please mention the things that you get nostalgic for, whether, and if it's something you actually lived, or if it's something you just really like from the past. And do you think, in order for it to be true nostalgia, you have to have lived it? Or do you just have to appreciate it? Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.